He said, well, just whatever you do, don't wait for a diagnosis like I did. And what he was trying to tell me was, it's so easy to fumble from one day to the next, believing that you're living your life as opposed to just existing. And he said, well, I was just earning money, thought I was doing right by my family, but I was, not necessarily being a very good example to children because he was just working. He wasn't present. He wasn't doing what he loved. And he said, don't wait for something horrendous to happen to give you the kick up the backside you need to follow what you love.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the wonderful Nick Butter. Nick is an endurance athlete, motivational speaker, and ultramarathon runner. Best known for being the first person to run a marathon in every country, being 196 marathons in 674 days, covered in his book, Running the World. Most recently, Nick became the fastest person to run around the coast of Britain after completing 200 marathons in an incredible 128 days. All up, Nick holds 8 world records with 2 world firsts. What I personally love about this conversation is Nick's beautiful humility. Nick has been on a lot of podcasts in his time, so I thought to take this opportunity to get to know him personally on a deeper level. The trajectory of Nick's life changed when he was told by now good friend Kevin Weber, who appeared on episode 5 of the To Be Human podcast and has terminal prostate cancer, to not wait for a diagnosis. This spurred a new path for Nick that took him into a new depth of experience of endurance and contribution. We speak intimately about the effects these experiences have had on Nick, through witnessing confronting poverty, to understanding the power of human connection, to recently exploring the idea of how to balance relationships with the commitment for high achievement. Nick has an openness about him and his story that is certainly endearing and inspiring. Please enjoy this conversation with Nick Butter. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Nick, where I would love to start is with a quote from your book, Running the World. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky with this one because it's not actually your quote. It's a quote by the beautiful Kevin Weber. And he shared with you, don't wait for a diagnosis. So where I would love to start with you, Nick, is if you could share the story behind this very short yet profound statement.
Yeah, sure. Where do we start with that? I mean, that little phrase really did change my life. And that's not an exaggeration at all, because what that led to was the whole Running the World trip in the first place. But then, of course, that journey around the world then changed me as a person without me really knowing it. And I knew everybody said, if you're going to travel around the world to every country, you're going to change. And I was like, yeah, well, we'll see. I'm sure I'll change a little bit, but I wasn't quite ready for how profoundly the people and the planet, that combination did have an effect on me. So those words from Kev back, when was that? 2015. I was running with him, a complete stranger, running with him in the Sahara Desert, running a big race called the Marathon des Sables, which is basically 7 marathons through the desert in a week. And it's a horrible race. It is difficult. It is hot, it is sandy, and there's about 1,000 people that take part. And you are put into tents with 7 other people, so 8 people per tent. And one of my tent mates was a guy called Kevin Weber. And I got chatting to him. We were running together. And then he dropped this bombshell on me that he had terminal prostate cancer and that he might not get to see his 9-year-old reach 11. And that kind of message was, as I think anybody that speaks to anybody that's terminally ill, you are shocked, you are sad, you are confused. There's all sorts of things that go through your mind. And then he gives me these little bits of information about, life's too short, etc. Grab life, do what you love, all of those kind of very classical messages. And he said, well, just whatever you do, don't wait for a diagnosis like I did. And what he was trying to tell me was, it's so easy to fumble from one day to the next, believing that you're living your life as opposed to just existing. And he said, well, I was just earning money, thought I was doing right by my family, but I was, not necessarily being a very good example to children because he was just working. He wasn't present. He wasn't doing what he loved. And he said, don't wait for something horrendous to happen to give you the kick up the backside you need to follow what you love. And it was that essence that kind of went round and round in my head after he said it. And it didn't really trigger much at the time. It was just this kind of slow burn in the back of my mind that he's kind of making a good point there. But also at the same time, I was already, I believed, doing a pretty cool thing. I was running out in the desert. I'd been able to step away from my job, and I thought, well, I kind of am. But Kevin's message was further than that. It was like, you know what, you've got this tiny opportunity, this blink of an eye in the existence of everything, and what you're doing. And so that's when I decided I wanted to raise some money for some charity work to help fight his particular cancer, prostate cancer, and also live by his counsel, live by his words. I love photography. I love meeting people. I love travel. I love running, of course. And so what could I do? And then the project to run a marathon in every country in the world was dreamt up. And then off I went. So those words sparked the last, 5, 6, 7 years of my life.
I always find situations like that so interesting because as you're sharing, it's like these little statements that are really profound, but they just don't seem to sit with you until you truly meet someone that is terminally ill or you lose someone in your life very close, that these sentences begin to sort of make more sense and can be, in your experience, like life-changing, life-defining, and change the trajectory of your life. And I've had Kevin on the podcast. I met him out in a multi-stage ultramarathon in Jordan, and he is just incredible. How profound he has changed your life. I feel like anybody that he speaks to, he has that impact on them. He really is such an incredible person. And so you've mentioned, Nick, that obviously you go into the space of wanting to run 196 marathons in 196 countries, and you do achieve it in 674 days. And I was thinking about how to go about this because it's a big experience and you've certainly covered it on a lot of podcasts. So I thought best to shout out Rich Roll. I listened to your podcast with him just after you'd actually finished. And It's an amazing podcast. It goes so deep into it. So I'll leave that for the listeners if they're interested in knowing deeper. But I as I suggested, I told Nick before we pressed record, this is the To Be Human podcast. So I would love us to get to know you more, Nick. And in reading your book, Running the World, something that really touched me and I wanted to learn more from you is your experience in Haiti. And you said, my heart was heavy and my soul was in dilemma. Can you share more about what you meant by that? Yeah.
And that was a feeling that, I suppose, started in Haiti and then just progressed as the trip went on. So Haiti was, I might get this wrong now, I think Haiti was country number 4 or 5. So very early on in the trip. What was it? Canada, the US, Cuba, Haiti, maybe. I might have that completely wrong.
It's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember where Haiti was my first introduction to real poverty. Firsthand, and I suppose poverty is a word that we use, and for different people, we conjures up different images. Maybe starving children, maybe ill health, that kind of thing. But poverty, when you see it in real life, it can take many forms. But desperation was, I think, something that really stood out to me. That these people, it's not just a transient or a gentle bubble in the background of, oh, we're in poverty. It is this minute by minute struggle of desperation. And I really saw that in the people in Haiti. Haiti, as I put in the book, it was once one of the, if not the richest and most wealthy countries in the world. Wow. And through British white dominance, we ruined it, along with a lot of other people. And that I started to think about that a little bit. I started to think about my place in what I was doing. Should I be jogging around the world, this privileged white guy trying to do some good for charity, but actually, in the eyes of most of the people that I was running past, especially in Haiti, I'm not doing that at all. I'm just wasting money that could be, putting food in their mouths. So there was all of these, and that started to gently eat away at me, because I wanted it to be a good experience. I wanted from Kevin giving me those words to, okay, you have to have, people say to me, oh, well, why did you do it? Yes, I did it to raise some money for charity, but I was also doing it for me. I was also doing it to live by what Kevin was saying. And so I had that balance of the message Kev gave and the want to be able to fulfill those directions from him, and to go to every country in the world, who wouldn't? And then on the other hand, I thought, well, you know what, the money that we're spending here, could that go elsewhere? And I also had the extra compounding experience in Haiti of going and seeing an orphanage there. I met a bunch of Canadians that were volunteering their time in the country, and they'd set up a church, they'd set up an orphanage through a lot of the earthquakes and the various bits and pieces that had happened in the country. And they were such giving people and doing great stuff and making a huge impact. And I think that's probably where I had the idea of starting my own charity, and that didn't actually come until later, but I think there was just a gentle spark somewhere in my mind that was like, okay, well, maybe we can do a little bit more than what I originally planned. We'll raise some money for prostate cancer, but maybe this is going to spark bigger things. And obviously it did. But that was my first real, I had no, I had hundreds and hundreds. I speak about this in the Rich Roll podcast, but I had hundreds of Post-it notes, little stickers all over the wall of all the expectations I had, all the problems we might incur, the blockers we have to overcome, etc. And none of them were, I'm going to start to feel rubbish in myself because I'm doing it. And so it was it was a real struggle. And then after that, I did come to terms with things, and I managed to kind of level things out in my head, and we started the charity, and I felt like that supported some of the, balanced things out a little bit, but it was a struggle in Haiti.
And in your story, you share about, you sort of put this focus on preconceptions. I'd love for you to share more about what were your preconceptions before you started running into sort of 196 countries, and then how did that change coming out of 196 countries?
Yeah, I think the overarching one is that through, thanks to mainstream media, I suppose, which effectively is just peddling negativity, just leave it at that, I guess, which I suppose is a, it's a vicious cycle, because we love to click on stuff that is going wrong. Think how many clicks and things have happened with the stuff that's going on in Ukraine at the moment, that we're all wanting to update ourselves on it, and we're talking about it as if we know what's going on and all this sort of stuff, and we do that and we perpetuate it, and yet the reality of the world is that 99.9% of the world, the people, the actions, the thoughts, the motivations are all the opposite. The people are unbelievably brilliant, even people in desperation, even people that are not necessarily doing great things, they're still fundamentally good, and we don't get that from media, because we're just seeing the bad bits. If I open my phone up now, guarantee that most of those few little icons on there with the headlines will be something that's negative. And so that was my huge realization in terms of preconceptions, that the world is very different to what you see in the media. And the other one is about scale, I think, scale of poverty, scale of the wealth divide, scale of races, the scale of the impacts of religion and faith, scale of just geographical scale of how big the planet is and yet how tiny it can be. You can, for £400, what's that, $750, you can travel more or less anywhere in the world if you book far enough in advance. And that is pretty special, just thinking about that fact. And then you've got the scale of, you look at stats of the numbers of people that have left their own country. There's tiny amounts of people that have left their own country. There's tiny amounts of people that have run a marathon. And there's huge amounts of people that are in poverty and don't have the opportunities and the freedoms that we have. So scale is something that really hit me. as I went around the world. And I think putting those two things together, that then made me have this new perception of the world. I think there's just kind of building on what we were saying earlier. In my mind, there's kind of 4 buckets of people. You've got positive people, you've got negative people, and you have people born into opportunity, and people that are not born into opportunity. And as well as I do, and many of your listeners will, the opportunity pot there's a lot of people out there with opportunity, but there's an awful lot of people that don't. And so I feel like we have this big responsibility to not just have a fun life, not just to feel like we get to the end and go, yeah, we did loads, we achieved loads, but actually make an impact. I think that answers the question.
It definitely does, yes. And this is going to be a bit of a loaded question, but I'm intrigued to know your answer to it, because I know that you obviously went to a lot of countries of people living in poverty. But in my experience in going to some of these people are the most happiest and most grateful that I've ever met. And it always seemed to confuse me because they were always very envious of where I came from. But there was something inside me that thought, I don't know whether I would like to take you away from where you are, because you seem happier than most people I know. What do you think is, and again, this is loaded and it doesn't need to be exact, but where do you think the balance is between having opportunity but still being able to be in that space of being happy and grateful?
Yeah, $1 million question, right? It's that's absolutely right. Your words say it perfectly. Even just I used the example of how many people waved to me or smiled at me when I was running past. You're running through somewhere like Sierra Leone or somewhere like Guatemala, somewhere where poverty is huge. The mortality rate of children is terrible. You've got you've got really bad poverty in some of these countries, and yet the correlation between the poorer you are, the more friendly you are, is just absolutely bizarre, and it did confuse me for a long time. You've got people with nothing, that they maybe have a bottle of water and the clothes on their back, and if they're lucky, a member of family, and that is literally it. That's what they have in the entire world. No knowledge, no education, no opportunity, no food. They're literally going from one day to the other without anything. And yet if I said, can I have some of your water, they would be like, yeah, of course. And they would offer without me asking. And that is just something that we in the commercial Western, dare I say, ruined world, we don't do. And it's quite the opposite. We like to keep everything for ourselves, even if we don't really need it. Let's say, I don't know, I like the mug I'm drinking out of. If somebody said, can I have that mug? I'd be like, no, it's my mug. Like, what? But how has it come to that place when all of these people around the world, they just be like, yeah, sure, have my mug, because it's completely different. So to answer your question about where the balance is, it's difficult, because I have those things of, would I want to, they're like, oh yeah, I want to go to England, I want to see London, I want to. Do you? Yeah, because I think you're going to be shocked, because it's not going to be as friendly, it's not going to be as idyllic, it's not going to be as peaceful, it's not going to be as calm, and I suppose more importantly, it's not going to be as simple. It's not going to be as simple as you are. So I do have to caveat all of that with the fact that the privilege that we have and the opportunities that we have do come from, that mug is mine, and that, that's all been generated, and I appreciate that, and that hasn't passed me by. And yet the world out there, there's so many people. I had a woman who I was running past. She had a little stool, and I didn't have any money left to buy any water, and I was very thirsty. And she gave me this bottle of water, and said, "Water is life." She said, and that was, she didn't want anything in return. I wasn't that far away from being able to find some money and come back. But she was like, no, just take the bottle of water. That's the least I could do to a fellow human being.
Beautiful.
And I don't think we think about, I don't know about you, but I catch myself regularly, either judging or looking at other people, and I don't see them as other human beings. It's strange. I think, hang on a minute, I've got to step back and look at this situation. So it's we can learn a lot. And that is another reason why I'd love to have an opportunity, and something that I'm doing in the future is being able to create a little bit of an education network with some schools, underprivileged schools, where we can take some kids out to just show them different parts of the world. Because the stuff that I learned just by having my feet in Haiti, for example, just standing there and looking, was so profound. You don't need to have a textbook. You don't need to have a lesson plan. You just stand there and look, and then all of a sudden you will instantly understand everything that you've been missing. And so when people say to me, "Oh, where would you recommend to go and run?" It's, anywhere that you've never heard of or you can't pronounce, or that, somewhere is completely culturally diverse. So that balance is hard. I don't know where that is, but we all need to see more of what we don't see in order to have better perception and realization on the world.
And in going through 196 countries, what was a moment throughout that experience that you felt really connected to another human being or to human beings?
I felt connected. That's a weird thing, right? Because I was traveling on my own, and yet I felt more connected to my species than ever, because I was meeting people, and I talk about these fleeting relationships that you have with a random passenger on a plane, where you can just chat to them for a couple of hours and then you'll never see them again, and yet you start to get to know them. And that's the same when you go on a run, but I was also privileged. I wasn't just meeting strangers on an aeroplane, or strangers on a train, or a taxi driver, or a hotel receptionist. I was meeting other fellow runners that were coming out to come and run with me. So I was having the best of both. I was having complete strangers, different interests, different ways of thinking. And I was also having the very finite group of people that all think in the same way, that will travel halfway across the world to come and run with me. So those close interactions are what made the journey. And I said this before on a couple of podcasts, that the journey can be summed up in one word, and that is people. People made this trip. If you take the people out of the planet, it's not the same. It's not the same experience. If I did this on my own, I wouldn't have been able to do it if there weren't other people, because the support network that I had around me would have made it impossible. But also you've got the likes of all of the embassy staff, all of the hotel receptionists, all of the I was going to say plane drivers, pilots, taxi drivers, all of those. And yet you've also got on top of that all the brilliant people that have come and run with me and supported and donated and bought the book. And so people made everything possible. Yeah, so I owe a great deal to people. And every time I've got my team now that I start to plan future missions with, or after we speak, actually, I'm speaking with some of my team, and I think I was quite good at trying to not take things for granted before, but relatively speaking to now, I am so much more grateful for just the simple things of being able just to, like we are now, just having, we've not spoken before, and yet we're halfway across the world and we're being able just to chat about these kind of things. How special is that? And so just those little basics of, remember I sat next to a lady on a plane, did it many times, but these people that have never been on a plane before, and she was panicking when the plane was taking off, and she thought that it would make sense to take her seatbelt off when the plane was taking off, because she was scared she'd be trapped, or it didn't feel right. And I said, no, I'm going to leave that on. So little interactions like that, all compounded together over 674 days, gives you this enormous boost of positive energy towards our species. So travel in itself, is just beautiful like that. Very, very grateful for it.
Yeah, I have a similar story. When I was in Kenya, I've been to Kenya quite a few times, but I'll never forget this little boy. I was about to leave myself, and this little boy came up to me and said, "Are you going on a plane?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, do you get to roll down the windows and like have a look outside?" And I was like, "Oh, that's so endearing." It's such a beautiful like imagination. I was like, "I wish."
Not quite like that, is it?
Yeah. So you more recently did Run Britain, which to my understanding is 5,240 miles, 200 marathons in 128 days. And I've heard you say that this was harder than the 196. So I would love for you to elaborate on how that is a thing.
How that is a thing. Yeah, that's very true. So, well, actually, caveat it all with logistically and financially,
Right.
the world was much harder,
Mm-hmm.
for obvious reasons. But Britain was physically tougher from, if you just look at the basic numbers, running the world was roughly 200 marathons in 674 days.
Right.
And Britain was 200 marathons in 128 days. So I was doing 3 marathons a week on the world, and then I went to doing 14 marathons a week
Wow.
on Britain. And so that was physically much more difficult, but it's exponential as well. It's not just the multiplication of that. It's the sheer, getting up and running for 12 hours every day on your own little island, and you don't get a break. You wake up at 6 in the morning, you get out and run, you finish at 6 in the evening, and you eat your food, which is about 40 minutes. You then take your sweaty clothes off, you get into bed, you ice your legs, you elevate your legs, and you're asleep within an hour and a half from finishing. And you wake up again and do it again. And you do that every day in, day out for 4 months. And so that is why there is no time for, writing things down, thinking about things, having a conversation, reflecting on the day. There's nothing like that. It is just run. And it's like entering a marathon that doesn't finish until 4 months later. It is just absolutely constant. So it was brutal. I mean, we obviously beat the original record by a long way. We did, we circumnavigated the whole country. But it feeds in very nicely to your last comment about people. And I had a very good friend of mine, Andy, who supported me on that journey. And I used to work with him we both got out of that game in our old finance jobs. And I called him and said, look, I need somebody that I can trust, that can be my right-hand man on this trip and drive my van, and you support me. You drive to every junction, you point the way to go, you drive every couple of miles to make sure I'm okay, you give me water, you feed me, you wash my clothes, you wake me up in the morning, you put me to bed at night. Everything you can imagine, just like I'm not exaggerating, like having a carer. Everything that he did was so utterly brilliant. I don't know many people that spend that much time with somebody that isn't your spouse or your partner or your family member. And so he was a friend that literally we spent 4 months like constantly together, and it nearly broke both of us individually because we were both, he lost so much weight, I lost so much weight because I was running, but it was stressful and it was a relentless task. And so that I'm incredibly proud of Run Britain, because nobody really realizes, unless you're there, quite how intense it gets. Because it's like a compound effect of day one is hard, but then you have day two on top of day one, and it just adds up until you finish. So yeah, I mean, we obviously we still see each other and speak and run and plan trips now, but we've such a special bond because of that time we had together. So yeah, Run Britain was much harder because of the intensity.
And because of the intensity, and as you shared, brutality, what was your mental game like during that period?
Worse than running the world, in terms of staying. I mean, the focus, I've never really struggled with, people say, oh, did you want to give up? Did you, I never really, on the whole thing, want to give up, because the same with running the world, because you know that this is why you're doing this. You know, it's like, I don't know, it feels like if you're a long jumper, it feels like just stopping the run up halfway down. Like, that's just absurd. Like, you have to,
so to speak.
You have to get to the end. Otherwise, what's the point? And so there wasn't really any part of me that wanted to stop, but my mental game was, I lost some of my hearing during the run, and I'm actually writing the new Run Britain book literally just before we spoke. So I'm writing that, which will be out later in the year. And within that, I talk about the weather and the physical elements. I broke my shin, I had ankle problems, I had a flipped meniscus in my knee, I lost my hearing because of the wind, because the wind was so strong, and when you're just running with the wind buffeting you, to the point that Andy made these, like the washing up Brillo pads that you have for scrubbing stuff. We cut those in half, and he cut one of his exercise bands, because Andy had to keep fit in the van because it's 4 months, otherwise you lose a load of muscle. So he took his exercise band with him, and he cut one of those exercise bands up and taped it around the Brillo pads, and I wore them taped to my head so they could block the wind out. Because it was getting so painful. So little things like that kind of add up to make this whole experience so demanding. I've forgotten what the question was, but I think that was covering.
Well, I asked you about your mental game. You certainly answered it. I'm just so intrigued, because not thinking about giving up is one thing, but what you achieved is just, as we've shared, it's intense and brutal. I'm trying to understand, like, what is it that really fuels you and drives you to be able to endure this? Because as you're sharing, there's severe injuries. These aren't light injuries. These are severe injuries when you're running, right? This is generally what would stop most people from running, let alone breaking records. What is it that's fueling you to be able to even move through the physical pain in such a circumstance?
And I suppose the true answers, we need a couple of psychologists present to understand, I suppose. But I honestly, the deeper answer is I don't know truly of why. But I do have a surface level understanding of, and it goes back to that original message from Kevin, that we are these small, tiny, insignificant beings, just, in a blink of an eye in the life of the planet that we are here. What can I do to achieve things for myself? And when I get to my deathbed, I can hypothetically look back and go, you know what, that was pretty good. I did something that I loved, and we did some, we were raising money for my charity for the Run Britain journey. However, I do question things myself, and when I'm planning my future things, do I want to put my body through that amount of pain and suffering, and my mind? And yet there are those, you've got the balance with all this stuff. The harder it is to achieve those things, the more that goes wrong, the things you have to overcome. You feel like it's almost like building a house. Every block is all the stuff that happens that you have to overcome, and the bigger and the better and the grander you feel when you achieve those things finally. And so I had some horrendously low moments during Run Britain for days, day in, day out. I was, when my shin was broken, I was hobbling on crutches and sticks, and the day that would take me 12 hours took me 19 or 20 hours. I was sleeping less. I was hallucinating. I was feeling faint. I was falling over. I was getting ulcers all over my tongue because of the painkillers I was taking, the salts and things. So I was physically and mentally absolutely abused by it. However, the hard things in life are worth doing. And I feel like I'm somebody that, even when I wake up every day, I'm just about to take the dog out for a 30-mile run today, and it's pretty windy and horrible out there, but I'm looking forward to it because it will feel great afterwards. So there's also a little bit of that answer is about, you start to become kind of institutionalized by what you, in a good way, by what you love doing. So if you can form your habit, and I talked with Rich about this, if you can form a good habit like that, then you get stuck into it a little bit more. And let's not forget the physical benefits of, you can't really, unless you're kind of idiotic like me with some broken bone injuries, you can't really do long lasting damage from running, as long as you're sensible. If you break a bone, you rest, which, okay, I didn't, but if you sprain an ankle, you rest. If you there's not that much you can do. So it's a very good but very difficult question to answer, because I don't truly know what fuels me. All I know is that I I just can't sit still. I can't have this life where I have this responsibility and opportunity and freedoms, and I am able to do this stuff and yet not do it. And so whenever I see something on social media of, I don't know, somebody that is either in a wheelchair or is blind or is deaf or is suffering in some way, I have all my senses, I have all my limbs, I have enough money in the bank to go and just go for a run today. I have all of these opportunities. And so who am I to sit back and not do that? I feel guilty. I feel almost, I don't feel sick, but you see my point. I feel like I'm just wasting my time if I don't do something. So there's something just innate in me that needs to do more.
And you shared the hard things are worth doing. Why is that important in sort of, I guess, appreciating and utilizing our opportunity?
Yeah, well, otherwise you just spend all of your time in your comfort zone, right? You just instantly become in a little bubble. It's the same with, on a smaller scale, if you have, I don't know, friends and family that say live a bit further from you. If you say, well, do you want to come over for dinner? And I say, well, it's 5 or 6 hours. Okay, maybe Australia terms, that's not that far. For us, that's a long drive. 5 or 6 hours. I'm not coming over for 5 or 6 hours for a dinner. If you make the effort, then it's fantastic, and you feel like it's almost that it adds to the occasion. You're not trying to say it adds to that. So I don't know. I would much rather put all of my energy into something that is out of my comfort zone and risk failing, risk not achieving it, than just to sit in my little bubble, because life isn't in there. There's just what if I go to my 9-to-5 job, commute there, commute back, put the same TV show on, put the same food in the oven, okay, fine, that's great. Many people don't have that opportunity to be that simple. However, there is more if you step outside of that, and you don't have to do it all the time. You can do it sometimes. You can do it a little bit. You can maybe not put the telly on, but go and just sit down and play with your kids, or maybe go to a different park, or maybe spend some time just researching a place to go next year. Something can be done more than that. And I think we get caught up in, well, money, as we all know, rules the world. And so everybody uses that as an excuse and a reason in equal measure, to say, well, I can't go and do that, because if I go to the pub, or if I go and enjoy myself every evening instead of watching the telly, then we won't be able to afford to put food on the table.
Right. Fair
enough. If you can find a little bit more of a balance, you can edge out of that comfort zone or expand the comfort zone so there's more in there. There's little ways of doing that, I suppose, but I am more for, if I've got my tiny little bubble of comfort, let's go far from it as possible and then work back to it when I need that comfort, which has worked so far. I don't know.
And do you feel like you have to keep going bigger and better, so to speak, with what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I don't feel like I have to keep going bigger and better. I feel like I was quite good at that initially, realizing that if you start with the world, then can you get bigger and better?
Yeah, right. You've gone to the moon.
Yeah, exactly. There's other things that I want to do in the future, which are can be seen as bigger and better, or harder, or more challenging, or whatever. But I have some little trips coming this year which aren't bigger, but I'm very much looking forward to, and they're different in their own right. Running around Britain isn't bigger than running all over the world, and yet it taught me different things. It brought me much closer to Andy. I have had so many brilliant realizations. For example, Run Britain, Andy was a big bird watcher, and he loves his birds. And so every time we're in a different part of the country, he would point out to me and say, oh, that's that bird. And so I know now probably 50 or 60 different species of bird, which I've never heard of before.
That's lovely.
I can now identify them. And so it's not necessarily about being bigger and better. It's just about being different and trying something that's different. So, for example, as I said, I'm going for a run with the dog today, and it's one of our first runs with a buggy that I have built, which effectively is a pushchair or a stroller for the children. But I've adapted it so my dog Poppy can sit there after a long run, because she can only run maybe she shouldn't run much more than 13 or 15 miles.
Wow,
And so if I go out, she can run a long way.
Yeah.
13 or 15, she would run more, but it's not fair on her. So if I go out and run 15 miles one way, she can then sit back in the buggy and run back. And so if we start to train like that, that means that later on in the year, roughly November time, I'm thinking about going and running north to south of New Zealand. And so I can run the whole thing, take the dog with me. I can just have my tent and my food with me and run simply. It's not bigger, it's not better, it's completely different. Never run a whole trip with a dog on my own, pushing a buggy up and down the hills in New Zealand. And I've never seen the whole country of New Zealand. And so it's new, it's a different experience. So no, it doesn't have to be bigger and better. It just has to, people always say to me, how do you pick what you do? It has to tick enough boxes that are unspoken and unassigned in my mind that go, yeah, I want to do that. And I think that is, put it this way, I want to continue running for as long as possible. And I want to run the north to south of countries. I want to run around countries. I want to run different trails. I want to run with different people that I've not met. I want to carry on doing that. And that's the vague plan. That doesn't have to be much more than that.
And why running? Why is it running that sort of fuels your life trajectory? Why
running? Maybe because I'm not as good at cycling or swimming. I think running is a very pure sport. You don't get, classically with swimming, you're in the water, so you can only do that you're not on the land ever. So that's a big difference. Cycling, you're often going too quickly, I think. I think there's this, I have lots of cycling debates and they say, well, we can go further and you can carry things. And so maybe you'll see more that way. And I say, well, I'm going slower than you and you miss things, that kind of stuff. And so there's that balance. But I think the honest answer is that I have naturally been better at running and I enjoy it. And I certainly enjoy I say to people I'm going out on an 8 or 9 or 10 hour run, they're horrified that they don't realize that my run is, I've got a backpack on, I've got the dog with me for a bit, and I will go and buy some food in a shop, I'll have some drink, I'll walk for an hour if I want to. It will just be a gentle day. It's Beautiful. Not going to be this huge kind of, looking at my watch every mile going, it's not about that. That's not how I run. And so maybe that's why I like running, because there's not that much pressure and it's a good way to see places. And of course, my past experiences said, from running all of these, my 974 marathons, is that I'm enjoying it. So why not?
It's very true. And recently on your social media, you posted about balance being really important to you at the moment. Can you share more about why this is something that you're focusing on?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you brought that up. Balance this is a very interesting transition in my life, because going from finance, intense, busy working life, to then giving that up to be a runner, if you can call it a job, then running became intense, and also running became my job. Running became a way to make money and to have a sustainable life. And so now I'm in this kind of third phase, if you like, of my adult life, working, real job, working, not a real job, aka running. And now I'm trying to find a balance between being able to sustain good, close friends, a routine, a home that isn't in a van, a balance with relationships. And I think it all stemmed from, if I'm being completely honest, it stemmed from the last relationship that I had with Nikki that fell apart because I was putting too much energy into my career, aka I want to do this trip, let's go do this, when actually I need to have more of a balance. So maybe do less of that, but put other people. I was being very selfish, I was being very self-absorbed with what I was trying to achieve, and everything else fell by the wayside. It was, as with everything that happens in life, you don't realize things until they're too late. And so fortunately, Nikki and I are still very good friends and still on good terms, and we've helped each other understand what I need to be able to change. And so I've got that understanding of what balance looks like for me. I'm just trying to get there. So I need to be less intense with some of the stuff that I do running wise, and I need to, in terms of the overall scale of time, I need to put more time into the things that I've been neglecting over the past few years. So and that's hard. I think everybody goes through that, but I've had good therapy sessions, and I think every adult, every child, every person that can have the opportunity should have therapy at some point, because you get taught a lot about yourself in a very controlled way, which is super useful. So I've understood that I need more time for me in a non-running capacity. I need more time for everybody else that doesn't impact running. I was at one of my best friends' what was it? It was a kind of a pre-wedding get together, because they couldn't have their wedding because of COVID, but people gathered anyway. And I went along to that, but I was training for something at the time, and I had to go out and run. I think it was 20 odd miles that day. So I went along to the event, and I had to leave the event to go running, and then I came back to the event afterwards. And so I think balance is, maybe that day I could have not gone for a run.
Right.
And so that kind of sums it up nicely, right? That I just need to find that balance. And of course, there's all the other nuances of different things that are, there's too much time to go into everything, but that's the essence of why I'm trying to find balance, and very consciously try and find it. Actually wake up and go, right, be balanced today. Give myself some time to write my book, give myself some time to do nothing, have some time in my diary which isn't full. That's balance, and I'm not going to get it right for a long time, but it's the start of the journey. Yeah,
it's certainly that awareness and then moving into the practice, and you're certainly not alone in that, Nick. And particularly with everything that you've achieved, it does, as I'm sure you would understand, it takes this amount of commitment and time away from other things to be able to achieve what you have achieved. So yeah, thinking of you as you integrate this new concept of balance. But I definitely think when it comes to relationships that, they are just as important as any other achievement. So I'm proud of you for exploring that, and excited to see how that goes for you.
Yeah, same. I'm excited to see it. And you've hit on a very good point there about the intensity of what I do. I can't go into a mission like running around Britain without being intense, because it will never finish, it will never work. And so I just have to kind of be able to switch that on or switch it off and have so we'll see. We'll chat again if I found the balance.
You'll either have another great achievement or you'll be in a relationship. So we shall see.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see which one happens.
But Nick, thank you so much for providing your time. I'm just so grateful to have connected with you. You're such an amazing person. And personally, I really love following your journey, and am genuinely really excited to see you continue to pave your path and everything, and your contribution with your charity. It's just really amazing, and I really admire you.
No, thank you so much. That's very kind. And equally, thank you for giving people like me a platform to chat through what we do and maybe share some messages, because without people like yourself, we wouldn't be able to do that on the scale that we do. So thank you. And you sound like if you've been meeting Kevin on a run, then you must be able to run too. So let's go and have a jog somewhere together.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. So on a final note, Nick, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. What does it mean to be human? I mean, I look at this from kind of the opposite angle, I suppose. What does it mean to not be human? So I have my dog that I adore. She's not human. She's a dog. However, I can see a lot of the human traits of the caring side of things, of the compassion, of the ability to think bigger. Human beings are able to think about other species, other planets, all of this sort of stuff. And yet being human, I think, to me, is about connecting with other humans and being kind. There's that old adage of there's the three ways to go about life, the three rules for life, and they are be kind, be kind, be kind. And so if you can just be kind, then that is what being human is. We have the ability to, and very importantly, no matter if you are living in poverty or not, you have the ability to take actions and choose whether you are being kind or otherwise. And it's just going back to my balance point of, I now have, because I'm human, the understanding that I can learn from things, I can change, I can adapt, I can become better, we can evolve quicker than anybody. So I'm very interested, and I listen to a lot of podcasts about like the science behind how human beings work. I'm really interested in the psychology of us as a species and the more of a macro level of where we've come from and where we're going. But I think it's the interrelationships between us that makes us human. Nothing really to do with travel or that. It's more about the diversity and the scale of which, on one place in the world you can have a country like Papua New Guinea with thousands of languages that are miscommunicating with each other and forming maybe conflicts. And then you have these wonderful places in the world that are the complete opposite of that. So communication, kindness, and the interpersonal skills, I think, is what makes us truly, and not just human, but brilliantly human.